take more deep breaths and recognize that, hey, you don't have to get everything right. You can make some mistakes, you can make some errors, you can let your people make mistakes, and it will be okay. One way or another, if it's a good product, if it's a good service, if people are going to buy it, they're going to enjoy it, they're going to appreciate it.
Alrighty, hello everyone and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today we have an amazing founder, a founder that has done it many times actually. We're going to be talking about all the good stuff that we like to hear, the building, the scaling, the exiting, the crazy times too, different cycles, whether it was during the dot-com bust to even, now, and how things have changed over time. But again, I think that you guys are all going to find this episode quite inspiring. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Jason Johnson. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
So originally born in Portland, Oregon, give us a walk through memory lane. How was life growing up over there?
Yeah, Portland's a great town. It's it's great growing up. Very granola. My parents were hippies, and so it was a very nice place to grow up. But I'll be honest with you, I moved to California for college, and I lived in California ever since. And the weather down here is a little bit better. So I love being an Oregonian, but I also love being in California.
And then in your case, actually you studied business out of all things. So what got you into the whole business, world?
Yeah, so my dad worked for a Japanese trading company, and he got to do business trips over to Japan. I got to see what it's like to do big business, and so I dreamed of someday working maybe for a big Japanese electronics company or something, and the business degree was sort of the path towards that.
And obviously that first company, had to do with Apple Computer. In 93, I'm sure it was a different type of Apple.
Yeah, for sure. So there's two companies I wanted to work for out of college. It was either Apple or Sony. And it's, back then Sony was the biggest consumer electronics company in the world. They made all kinds of awesome gadgets. There was this showroom in Tokyo that even to this day rivals, the best showroom showing the most gadgets of anything anywhere. And I got to go multiple times. So I ended up at Apple, which was pretty special. I got to oversee their distribution business, which this is before there was Apple retail stores, and it was quite an experience for a young person in their 20s.
So you did Apple, then you did Tooth Systems. How do you evolve all the way to, let's say, InterQuest, which was your first company that you really venture into the world of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so the jump is I joined Tut Systems, which was the first venture capital backed startup that I was an employee of. And Tut made these internet routers, these like modems for the home. And while I was working there, I got the idea for InterQuest, and that was to actually take these modems and put them into people's homes and create one of the first broadband DSL services that was really focused on apartment buildings. That was our niche. We operated in 17 states doing high-speed internet service to apartment buildings.
That's incredible. So then tell us, how did InterQuest, come together?
Yeah, so InterQuest was funded by some friends. In fact, one of my mentors from college, from Pepperdine University, the vice chancellor, he was one of the first checks in there, and we built up InterQuest and ended up rolling it together with two other similarly sized startups doing broadband. One was doing hotels, one was doing office buildings. So it was literally to be called a BLEC, a building local exchange carrier, and that roll up of those three companies was going to be the biggest IPO of 2000. It was called Darwin Networks. We wrote the S1. We had Credit Suisse and Lehman Brothers as underwriters, and on paper, Jason Johnson was going to be extremely wealthy, but we all know what happened in April of 2000, just after we filed that S1.
Wow. Because the valuation at the peak, what was the valuation at the peak? And obviously we know what happened.
The underwriters were expecting this, to be one of the biggest .com IPOs, right? It was going to be huge. I can't remember what price they were aiming for. But we were literally just getting ready to go do the roadshow, right? They were going to rent a jet. We were going to fly around the country. We hired a CEO that had like the best pedigree you could imagine, raised a tremendous amount of capital. Long story short, Darwin is dead. Darwin Networks went from being the potential biggest IPO of 2000 to probably one of the biggest failures of 2000.
What do you think that whole experience told you about essentially, cycles, and to weather the storm and the cycles as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I'm lucky that I was still in my 20s at the time, and so I still felt like I had a lot of my future ahead of me, and so I didn't. I actually, it's very strange to say this, but I really wasn't that upset, which I know sounds crazy because um, I went from being potentially this huge successful entrepreneur to needing to find a job, and I literally had to go find a job. And fortunately, one of my mentors, a famous lawyer in Silicon Valley, Craig Johnson, unrelated to my last name, he was a mentor of mine, and he said, Jason, you're still young, you still have a lot of energy behind you. What I suggest is you go get a job, go back to a big company like an Apple, and spend a few more years kind of retooling and getting your confidence back and thinking about what you would do next. And that's exactly what I did. I went and got a job at Dolby Labs and worked there for a whole bunch of years. And I did exactly that. I learned a lot and I retooled to get ready to take another swing at the fences.
I mean, that was 12 years. So that's quite an amount of time because, I mean, once an entrepreneur, you're always an entrepreneur. So what do you think needed to click for you to really feel good about the idea of going at it again, with August Home?
Yeah, so honestly, I had some friends that were kind of giving me a hard time because now I was an executive. In fact, I was a candidate to be potentially to be the CEO of Dolby Labs. It had gone public, and they were kind of picking different people to groom as potentially a future CEO. And they sent me to do the Harvard programs and the Stanford programs, had executive coach and all that. And I kind of was enjoying that path, right? Had a giant salary, right, and big RSU stock grant, making lots of money. But one of my friends said to me one day, "Hey, you've been there at Dolby for a while now. I thought you were an entrepreneur. Are you ever going to take another swing at it? You going to ever start another company?" And that once the gear started thinking, spinning on that, I started thinking, boy, I might have to do something to make myself, take another risk.
So then tell us about the sequence of events that needed to happen for you to have the exposure to, hey, I think that this may be a risk worth taking.
So this is a true story. This sounds kind of wacky, but it's actually true. So I went to my boss's office one day. We were working on acquisitions for Dolby, and I had an acquisition I thought was very very should be recommended to the committee, and I was going to be the champion. And I presented it to my boss in his office, and I said, I think this is a really good one. I want to champion driving this one. And he said to me, and I'll never forget. He said, "Hey, Jason, you're very ambitious. I love your vision. I love your energy here, but I think you should just don't try so hard." Like he said, "Go back to your office." And I might point out, our offices were really nice. Like I had an amazing, huge office with a table and chairs and a couch and a nice view. It was just a beautiful office. He said, "Go back to your office and just read the Wall Street Journal. Just relax." And he was dead serious. He was like, "Just don't try so hard. We're a very successful company. We don't have to do these acquisitions. Just enjoy how great it is. We don't have to work this hard." And I say that because I'm very grateful he said that to me, because I went home and told my wife that story that night, and she said, "It's time for you to go. It's time. It's just not for you. You need to move on." And so I did. I quit. I just quit.
So then what happened next?
Yeah, so I quit, and then I had a couple of friends that we talked about getting a shared office together. One was Jonathan Abrams, the founder of Friendster, right, the first social network. Zach Bogue, who was an attorney doing a bunch of different things. This is before he started Data Collective Ventures with Matt Ocko. And Michael Levitt, a longtime friend, also a big corporate guy, but also an entrepreneur. And the three of us decided to get an office together. And we started looking at little offices to just share a space together, to just be in the same room together. And I had coffee one afternoon with Tim Chang, who was a venture capitalist at Norwest Ventures at the time, before Mayfield. And Tim heard me mention this, and Tim said, "Well, what if I gave you some money and you got a bigger space, and you could have not just the four of you in there, but other pedigreed people like yourselves? Would that be interesting?" And so I mentioned to the guys, and they're like, "Yeah, if Tim wants to give us some Norwest Ventures money to get a bigger lease, a bigger space, why not?" So we got this big space, and that's what became Founders Den. And Founders Den was really the first co-working space that was invite only. This is before WeWork, and it was for pedigreed people that had either built and sold companies, or We actually we had a good relationship with YC, so we invited most YC graduates to come be at Founders Den. And to answer your question, that's really where I got the inspiration to create August. Is I was suddenly around people who were building and creating things, and I thought, gee, I've always wanted to do a consumer electronics company ever since college, wanted to work for Sony or Apple. If I'm ever going to do it, now's the time. I have the connections, I have the background. Let's go for it.
And just to highlight, one of those moments of Founders, then how was it like to be next to Gavin Newsom for 3.5 years? That sounds wild.
Yeah. So each of us knew Gavin kind of socially, but one of my partners comes into Founders Den one day and he says, "Hey guys, you probably saw that Gavin was just elected as lieutenant governor." And he's not really someone who wants to be in Sacramento all the time. He wants to be where the energy is. He wants to be in San Francisco. And my partner says to us, he wants to rent a desk. And I tell you, these desks, it's kind of like what I'm sitting at right now. They're like 44 inches wide. And we're like, you mean the lieutenant governor of the fifth largest economy in the world wants to sit at a 44-inch desk, just like one of us? And he said, yes, that's exactly what he wants to do. And so, so for the next 3.5 years, as he was lieutenant governor before he got elected governor, he actually sat there, and that was his day-to-day office. And it was fun because we got to learn a lot about the how do you run a giant economy, and then we also had great security, right? We're probably the most secure co-working / incubator space in San Francisco.
That's amazing. So then how was it like, being there and really, feeding yourself with all these great people, the innovation that was happening amongst all of you, and what was, the inflection point for you to really be like, okay, I think that August is going to be my next thing?
Yeah, so just being around people that are creating stuff and just asking them literally at the water cooler, what are you working on? What are you up to? And we of course did demo days and stuff. So we got to bring in VCs, and just that energy and the excitement of people building and creating just makes you ask lots of questions. So I had at Dolby, actually, one of the things Dolby does is it licenses all kinds of technologies, not just audio and video technologies, but also a very wide range of technology standards. And one thing that I created was the NFC licensing consortium. And NFC is that technology in your phone that you use for authentication and for payments. And so I had the idea of using NFC for authentication for access for door locks. But I'll never forget. There was a guy named Kanishk working there at Founders Den on this credit card that was Bluetooth. They would store all your credit cards. And I was talking with Kanishk about NFC, and Kanishk said, what would be better than NFC is this new Bluetooth standard called BLE, Bluetooth, this non-pairing version. If you're going to do access control, this would be way better than NFC. And it was one of those conversations that really was incredible, because it really made the August lock be able to do what it did, and that is allow you to issue a key, from thousands of miles away to somebody, and they could have that key, so to speak, on their phone, and they could access an Airbnb or your guest house. And it was those kinds of conversations that really got August and many other startups going.
So what was the business model there? How were you guys making money with August?
Yeah, so when the August lock was launched, it was the first version was I think it was $249, and you can buy very inexpensive Bluetooth locks now, but it was a very premium device. It was very Apple-esque, if you will. Eve Bahar is the designer. Eve spares no expense on materials and craftsmanship. He knows how to design things really, really well. Very beautiful. We sold those. We sold those in thousands of stores, every Apple store in North America, Best Buy, Home Depot, even Target stores. August quickly became the most number one selling smart lock. And we even did a video doorbell as well, but didn't quite have the volume of sales that Ring had on their video doorbells.
And you guys raised some money. You guys raised about $70 million, and then the company ended up being acquired. What was that journey like? And I heard that this is your biggest exit to date. So what was that that experience like? Make us insiders that experience of going through this acquisition, because obviously this was the second time around that you had founded and went through an acquisition. And from your first acquisition, I'm sure you learned a lot of stuff that probably you had in mind where you were going through this journey here. So with August, so make us insiders. How was that journey of going through that M&A, that acquisition like?
Yeah, so this is actually a good story. I hope your listeners will appreciate this because the way this shaped up was really interesting. Um, August had this great growth, but our locks were really only limited to North America. The way that we designed the device as a really a robot that installed on the inside of your door was only compatible for locks in North America. So we really didn't have much growth beyond North America with that product. And I saw that. I saw that we could make other products. We could try to make other smart home devices in the home, but the time came when we kind of hit market saturation, and I didn't even know until a few years later how much market share we had, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So what I decided to do was instead of just trying to just drive more sales of these devices, I actually went to my competitors because at this point we had built a software stack. We built an access control system that still is the best today of all smart locks. And it ties into Airbnb and Verbo and many systems. It's really an amazing API. So actually went to all my competitors, Schlage and Yale and Kwikset, and I offered my access control software to them for free. And this is kind of a crazy thing because each time I talk to these companies, they're like, "A, why would you talk to us? You're our worst enemy, and we're your worst enemy. And B, why would you give us like the jewels of your technology for free?" And the answer was because we wanted to do access control. We really wanted to own access control and do a really good experience. Really help with again the vacation rentals or in-home delivery and other things you could do if you do access control really well. But this is the key for your listeners. It was building those relationships with those companies and trying to offer them something, whether it was for free or for pay. Building a relationship, having a dialogue is what led to August ultimately being acquired, because all of them ended up asking if they could buy the company. And that's what you want, right? You want multiple people to want to buy you and to bid against each other, and that's exactly what happened. And I personally ran the whole process myself. I had a great COO, CFO, Bharat Vasant. He's a brilliant former investment banker, but he and we ran the process, and I had these multiple companies bidding against each other to get to a price that my board is very excited to take.
It sounds like the years with Gavin Newsom also influenced you because now you're a commissioner. Well, what's going on with you being a commissioner nowadays?
Yeah, it's funny so the day that Gavin got elected as governor, he actually came to Founders Den, and he just he wanted some alone time, and so he went into one of our conference rooms by himself and was just kind of like processing what just happened. I mean, it's a big deal being being elected head of the fifth largest economy in the world. And I think it was Zach or somebody said, "Hey, we should go chat with them because we might not be able to hang out with them like we've been these past few years. Let's go." So we walk into that little room, we start chatting with them, and one of the things Gavin said was he's like, "Gosh, one of the things I have to do is I have to like make hundreds and hundreds of appointments. I mean, there's a lot of commissions and roles he has to fill." And I didn't miss a beat. I'm like, well, I'd be open to serving on a state commission if I can be of service to you and to the state of California. And so, that's how I ended up on the Little Hoover Commission.
That's amazing. So obviously, part of the entrepreneurial spirit in you, you're not going to stop. And that brought you to Doma, which is your latest baby. What are you guys doing at Doma?
Yeah, so I did my earnout. I actually really enjoyed my earnout with Yale. Yale is the company who bought August. Yale, Assa Abloy is the big holding company out of Sweden. I had a great earnout, a really pleasant company. I really enjoyed working with them. We did some great things, some acquisitions, and then expanded the August platform I mentioned earlier. Now powers their locks all over the world, which is pretty cool to see your technology go into locks all over the world and used by tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. So then I had a little bit of time off. I actually I'd built a home in Napa, California, and did a lot of bike riding and pickleball, and had some downtime, and started thinking about the smart home, and what are some of the challenges there? What has worked? What has not worked? And if I was to take another swing at it, what would I want to do differently? How would we approach the smart home in a whole different, fresh way?
So tell us about like what's the business model and also where you guys are at, because I know that you also recently raised a seed round, which is exciting.
Yeah. Very, very fortunate to have some of my previous investors, Uncork Capital and Modern Ventures, as our lead for our seed round. We'll do a Series A soon. We actually did that round about a year ago, and so Doma in essence is taking a new approach to the smart home. In fact, we're using a new term. We're calling it the intelligent home, because we think that most smart home devices aren't really that smart, and most of our homes aren't that smart. So we're looking at like adding intelligence, right? And more than just connectivity, but how do we have these devices talk to each other? How do we have them be more than just connected? And for us, some of the key things that we're trying to solve with Doma is those failure points, right? So one of the challenges with these devices is that if they're battery powered or if they're plugged into an outlet, those are potential failure points, right? Batteries die or things can be unplugged, and then that thing is no longer reliable. You can't trust that thing to do what it's supposed to do. And so one of our core principles with Doma is we just don't have batteries. We don't have things to plug into walls. It's more ingrained into the fabric of the home, into the actual existing devices and appliances and systems of the home.
So if you go to sleep tonight, Jason, and you wake up in a world where the vision of Doma is fully realized, what does that world look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's that Jetsons like experience that we've all wanted, right? We wanted a home that is responsive to our needs, right? So as opposed to us having to open up an app and press buttons or speak a voice or go around switching and sliding and pressing, like if the home was just more responsive to our needs, and helps us to just end of the day feel safe, secure. Maybe it's monitoring our health. It's taking care of problems that I don't have to think about. That I know that my home, I've invested in the infrastructure, and it's doing what it's supposed to do without me having to worry about it or having to maintain or create schedules and automations and scenes and all those things that people just don't do and they don't enjoy doing. They want it just to work.
So let's say I'm able to put you into a time machine right now. Let's say I'm able to bring you back in time to that moment where you are at Touch Systems and you're thinking about a world where you can launch something of your own. And let's say, that's the moment where, you and your wife, were like, hey, maybe you should go do something else. No. And I guess let's say you have the opportunity of giving that younger self one piece of advice before launching a company. What would that be and why, given what you know now?
I think it's safe to say if you were to interview many of my employees over the years at my different startups, and there's been a couple we haven't talked about that that are not as fun to talk about. It didn't go as far. I think I think I've always been a very intense person. I think I've always been very very focused, very intense, and I run a pretty tight ship. And if I could give myself some advice, younger Jason, I'd say take more deep breaths and recognize that hey, you don't have to get everything right. You don't have to be that intense. You can make some mistakes. You can make some errors. You can let your people make mistakes, and it will be okay, right? One way or another, if it's a good product, if it's a good service, people are gonna buy it. They're gonna enjoy it. They're gonna appreciate it. And if it's not, then frankly, then you being more intense is not going to solve that, right? You probably need to just be more reflective and more able to be comfortable with change and pivot.
Now, when when we're thinking about pivots, for example, I mean, I'm sure that you've seen a few of those. What has been your biggest lesson around pivoting or perhaps adjusting to what the market is asking you?
I've always believed that building a startup is a three-legged stool, right? It's team, it's product, and it's distribution, right? And you have to have all three. Ideally, you have an unfair advantage in at least one of those, right? And we can talk about unfair advantages, but you have to have all three of those. And what I've seen, and with my own companies even, and some of the companies I've been involved with, is that sometimes we get too focused on trying to overly optimize one of those legs, when the truth is you just need that leg to be firm, right? It doesn't need to be, right? What you need to make sure is all three legs are firm and not over index on one at the risk of the other two. And so that's where pivoting and changing making tough decisions. I remember the first tough decision I ever had to make, and that was that first DSL company. We actually started doing not just apartment buildings, but also office buildings and hotels, right? Because we were bringing broadband to the building and then using these little DSL modems. And I hired a professional to come in and help me with the business because I was still very young. And he said, you got to give up two of the three. Like you can't be a master of all three of those. Those are three different markets. And he was right. He was right because working, in one of those industries and really knowing the people and the relationships and that was very important, as opposed to trying to do all three at once.
I love that. Well, Jason, for the people that are listening that would love to reach out and say hi, what is the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm Napa Jason J. On X, I'm JC Johnson, and I'm happy to get messages on either of those.
Amazing. Well, Jason, thank you so much for being on the Deal Maker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.